Welcome to the Sales SOS podcast, where we answer your sales distress calls. I'm your host, Liz Hyman, bringing the rescue boat to your sales challenges. In this ever-changing sales environment, it's easy for leaders to feel adrift. We're here to be the beacon guiding you to success. Each episode, I'm joined by top sales experts and practitioners who have navigated this waters and come out victorious. Together, we'll uncover the insights and strategies that will help you hit your sales targets and grow your business. So if you're ready to turn your sales distress into sales success, you're in the right place. Let's dive into today's topic. Hi, I'm Liz Hyman, and this is the Sales SOS podcast, and I'm your host, and this is your crew who's going to help save you from your sales nightmares. I am talking to this team about CRMs. We've had a couple of segments talking about what they are, how they work, and mistakes that people make when they're setting them up. Let's talk now about the continued use. Like, there's protocols that we need to put in place. So nothing's worse than having a bunch of data that isn't accurate. So we need to talk a little bit about what are some of the protocols you need to put in place around entering data, around moving things through whatever it is. Let's talk about that and maybe the iterative process for keeping that CRM doing the things that we need it to do. So, maybe, I don't know, Chris, maybe we start with you this time. What are some of the protocols that you put in place for your team around using the CRM, naming, what kinds of things do we need to be thinking about?
Well, I think you start out with how are you going to be inputting accounts. Almost every large organization ultimately gets to a point where that goes through at least an approval process of some sort, because you don't want all of the different variations of an account to be in there, because that's going to mess up your data. It's going to mess up your reporting. It's as a sales leader, it's going to mess up your conversations that you're able to actually have, right? So you want to make sure that your data is at least as clean and accurate as you can get it. So you make that part easy. The other thing that you want to be able to do is make sure that you're able to find the information that you need, that it's consistently laid out, and that you're not overimposing one piece of the organization over another, as we talked about earlier. With you don't want accountants running your CRM, right? That or what have you. You want somebody who actually has an understanding, at least to some degree, of that revenue stream, not just what the output is.
Okay, so naming protocols is where we're starting. So what do we need naming protocols around? Actually, the name of the company, the account, right? Because we don't want Coca-Cola Incorporated, right? Which I've seen a million times. There are 16 iterations. Or how about state? Is it spelled out? Is it two letters? Or is it spelled wrong? Is it spelled right? Or city, right?
Or you'll have people that add ink to the back of a name or whatever, right? And next thing you know, you've got 15 versions of that same account.
So you either need to have a protocol that says we pull it from their website, or every company is put in this way. It's all capital letters. It's all small letters. We name. We put ink, we don't put ink, whatever it is, but we set the rule so it's consistent, so you don't end up with duplicates. What's really cool is, and I'm not a HubSpot fan, but what I will say is what's really cool is if you use HubSpot and you type in the URL, it will pull up the name that they have on their website. So that would help prevent some of that. What other things?
Why are you not a HubSpot fan?
I know, I love HubSpot.
Yeah. Like what?
I'm learning to like it more and more, actually. I like the associative part of it too. So I'm actually becoming more of a fan.
The number one thing she hates is the sales view. It's that's it. The other parts.
We can have a conversation about this, Liz. So here we had asked about ways to make it simpler. One of the things that I do now that I wish I would have figured out a long time ago, and I didn't. And now that I have, I feel like I've found the light, or I'm drinking the right Kool-Aid, or whatever that thing is. I set up the dashboards on any implementation so that the leadership team dashboard is a roll-up of all of the dashboards. The grouping of sub-company or sub-teams We're all looking at the same view. The only thing that's changed is the filtering of the dashboard. So we're all looking at the same information. And then the individual rep dashboard is the same information, just filtered by them. And by going through that simple process, communication is so much better across teams, across functional organizations, across the entire group. Has changed everything for me. And that is one of the reasons I'm a big fan of, and you can do it with Salesforce too, but a big fan of HubSpot and the filtering that is supported in dashboards.
Yeah. So dashboards are really important, and how they're set up is important. And that we all look at things the same way. Like if every person in your team looks at stuff differently, they understand it differently. So what other protocols, what other naming protocols or other protocols do we need to have?
I have a big one, Liz. This is Renee. I have a really big one, and that is in this exact same way that Chris pointed out, the input of it, like when it's person doing one contact at a time, like putting in a company name, you have to think about when you're going to be importing and integrating data from multiple sources. And again, got to speak up here because marketers probably touch more tech than anybody in the entire company. You're going to be integrating data in from different places. You have to build it out properly, but that mapping of the integrations where you get things in, if you press one button wrong, you're going to change everything because you're changing the source of truth. So having one person oversee the protocols for the mapping of integrations and being the keeper of the source of truth, so that if somebody's like, okay, maybe you're using Salesforce and HubSpot. A lot of companies do that. Don't love it. Matter of fact, I hate it. But if you're taking marketing leads, right, and moving them into the CRM and Salesforce, you can automatically override tons of valuable sales information if you don't know what you're doing when you integrate that data, right? So you have to choose which one is the source of truth. And once you decide which one is the source of truth, how you respect the source of truth when you get that data in. And it's one of the biggest places I see process fall apart.
I think you have to have naming conventions around whatever it is you sell, the product name or solution, whatever it is, have some structure that you're using for that. So it's easy for people to understand, because you can get in, especially in technology, you can get a whole lot of things that sound similar, but in reality are quite different. And if you get those things mixed up, you're going to end up with bad data, even down to that level, which means you may end up hiring for a particular thing that you think is coming and find out later that it's something very different. And next thing you know, you're worried, you're creating more problems for your business, not helping.
Absolutely. What other protocols or conventions do we need?
I think one is Bryn talked about it in the last episode, which is, and Chris talked about it too, which is internal training for users on how to use the CRM. Because like you said, Chris, contact type could mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, especially because they may be coming on, we cannot assume, and most likely this is the case, salespeople move from company to company. Their lexicon and terminology of things are going to change. So you can't assume that they're all going to understand the same thing for you. That to me is one of the biggest ones. I know that this was a nightmare in the companies that I have dealt with and before. I'm very curious to know what y'all's thoughts are. And this is specifically around data and rules around accounts that have either been merged, meaning Coca-Cola bought this other company, right? How do I preserve the history of these two companies together into one? And that may be pretty easy.
For 1 second, because maybe
Sure.
Coca-Cola should be sponsoring us.
Yeah, maybe.
Catch up.
That the other difficult and happens a lot is spinoffs, divestitures. So we've had companies where they split. You're a vendor for this particular company. They split. Now you want to track the history of that split. We've in the past, in one of the Fortune 100s, they split 3 times within like 2 years. So how, as a supplier, do you manage all of that and that relationship? Because typically, a lot of times, what ends up happening is somebody just creates a brand new account for that, and now you have zero history, zero conversation, nothing, right? And you do that, you lose all of it. There was Now, in that company that I consulted for, they did not have a good strategy for this. I'm so curious to know what you guys do and how you guys do that.
Well, I think the first part is you actually should have some level of understanding or rules around this on how you deal with it from a salesperson perspective, right? If there's multiple accounts that if someone gets acquired or someone gets divested, who now owns that account, right? And maybe it's multiple people, but let's just assume it's one. How do you handle that? Is it the person who had the parent company? Well, what if the person who had the acquired company had done 5x the revenue over the past 24 months than the person who owned the parent company who was still trying to get in? You're still going to give it to that guy, right? Have some understanding of how you're actually going to allocate these things. If you have those rules set up, then it becomes a whole lot easier when the business decision from an entity that you have no ability to control actually splits, merges, acquires, what have you. You've got some basis for how we're going to handle it from an organizational perspective.
Yeah.
I'm going to add one that I can't believe would come out of my mouth, but privacy and security protocols. Because I never think in terms of this, but it just popped in my head, the ability to or not to be able to, who can download information, who can get to that content. And I think that's something that is, especially as an emerging company, that you have to really think about is, I guess, level of user privacy and security. I don't know. I don't know much more about that, but it just popped in my head, and it's pretty important to keep
more and more important.
It was actually going to be my next point too, Bryn. I agree with you wholeheartedly. User permissions. A lot of protocol around user permissions. I have come in on multiple occasions right as an entire department has quit. Right. That's part of why I've come in. I mean, believe it or not, and especially over COVID, this was happening a lot. You get one person leaving, and in some of these smaller companies, there's a little bit of chaos. One person leaves, and then it's like a domino effect of a bunch of people leaving. And almost to a T, all of them had someone export their all the client lists and take them with them to a competitor. Right. So separate of that, you also have privacy issues with adhering to rules and regulations, particularly if you're a regulated market. If you have HIPAA regulations or something like that, or legal repercussions, you have to be if you have a company that has any data on minors, you have to be extremely careful on how that data is treated as well. So user permissions that protect the company and protect the customer, but also protect employees. Right. Yeah. I've seen a marketer brokenhearted and scared of being fired because they thought they were deleting a list and they actually deleted a bunch of contacts. Right. So you're protecting all involved when you do that.
One of the things John asked about was the whole kind of merging of the information. I think there are a couple of different ways that you can look at it. One is parent-child relationships inside the CRM. The other one is kind of like an AC or a BCAD type thing, where it is, what do we do prior to it, and do we have it just as a historic record, and is everything in one area as things go through? And a lot of that comes into the process stuff that Chris was talking about. As you think about those permissions, think about what happens when you maybe when someone is exiting the relationship but needs to work through a transition period. So they might need to have access to certain things during that transition period, but shouldn't have access to everything. How can you turn certain things on or off, and who has access to what, and what can they change, and what things can they potentially disconnect? I went through a nightmare scenario with HubSpot recently where the only way that we could have an integration work was if we turned everybody into a super admin for the first part of the integration. And Renee, thanks for rolling your eyes. You're like, are you freaking kidding me, guys? How have you never done this integration before? Now, on the cool part about it, we only had to turn it on while the integration happened, and then we could turn it off afterwards. But still, we can design better systems.
So I want to talk about another piece of it, because that stuff is really important. let's dive in though to the opportunity part of it, right? So how we put in the customer and the account, all of that stuff matters. Is it street? Is it ST? Is it core? Like all of those things matter and they're important. And how we label them matters. If they're a distributor versus an end user, are they, all of these kinds of things matter and we need to figure them out. When we get into the opportunity, it feels like to me, that's one of the places where there's sort of the most room for confusion. One of the things, and I think, Chris, you mentioned it briefly, or John, it might've been you, I'm not sure. What are the rules to move something from stage to stage? Because every salesperson interprets it the way they want to. Right. So one person will say, well, there's the automatic percentages and this one says 30% chance of close. If I move it into the next stage, it's going to say 50% chance of close, but I only think there's a 30% chance. So I'm not going to, right. So what are the rules about moving it from stage to stage? Or another piece, and I'll let you guys take it from there, is that I don't really know. I don't really know what when this is going to close, but it's requiring me to put a close date. So I'm just going to write something. Like, is there a protocol around? Can you set it up so you don't fill it in? Do you have a rule that says, it's January 31st because nothing ever really closes on? Like, what do you do with some of these things that are the biggest confusion makers around opportunities? And Chris, I see you. Go.
I think even on that last point, what do you mean by close, right?
Yes.
Because I've seen people where their view of close is, I got agreement from the client that we're the vendor of choice and they're going to be ready to go forward. Most likely that's not going to mean close. Close means paperwork is signed, right? Like, we've gotten to an agreement, we've gone through contracts and everything else. So if you're basing off that first date, it might be a month and a half before you get to that actual close date, right? So how are you defining it? I think putting in fake close dates can be challenging, but I think you have to have a realistic view of when you're going to look at that. And then I would say adjust for some level of risk if you're not sure. And that risk is going to, because nobody really ever complains when a date gets pulled in or the dollar size goes up. They only really get agita when you slip a date and you slip that date multiple times and things like that. So being able to understand, what are we really saying means closed? What are we really saying means qualified, whether that is marketing qualified, sales qualified, what have you? How are you moving between those different stages in your process? And if you can't get clear on that, get clear on that. It'll help in the way you design your system and what you're requiring from your sellers, your marketers, whoever else is using your CRM.
Mike, go. I know you're like dying.
We are going to have an entire hour to talk about hour and a half to talk about process stuff. So I'll be really careful about this. But to Chris's point, have definitions of terms. Lead. As a leader inside the business, lead the team through the process, figure out what words mean, and document those definitions. And you can do all of that kind of work. Have as far as close dates go, if you don't have a close date, you don't have a deal. And I will die on that hill. Like, so the close date, right? Is it valid? Is it real? If the deal is not real, don't build it in. Don't build the opportunity into the system. And if you have people who are building deals without close dates or a view toward when someone wants to solve the specific problem that you're solving for, then I think you're a poor leader inside your organization. You have a bad system. Now, good close dates are things like fiscal years, calendar years, quarters, compelling events that take place inside the business that might indicate that money is going to be available, or some kind of MBO, management-based objective, is due to be delivered to the organization, or some other commitment that the board has made to others is due. Ask those questions. Ask better questions, have better definitions. And if you don't have those inside your organization, again, I challenge you as a leader. It sounds like I have a lot of leadership issues.
Yeah. Well, let's talk. We're going to talk about that another day. What other things, what other areas is there confusion that we need to set rules around within the CRM? And we are almost out of time. So any last thoughts on that? And then we can wrap up.
Speed at which information is updated. Like, let's update things as and when we have information. As leaders, be comfortable with the idea that deals are like chutes and ladders. They're going to go backward and they're going to go forward.
Yes.
Like that's going to happen. Close dates are going to slip. If you don't empower and enable your team to lead in their opportunities, again, you've got a leadership challenge inside your business. So be comfortable with the idea that things are going to move back and forth. Stages are going to move back and forth. Dates are going to change back and forth. And then be very clear around how often you want that information to be current. And ideally, people are updating the CRM in their workflow, not pushing it to the end of the week like I used to do before I led a team. And then ultimately, when I started leading teams, found Salesforce or CRM religion.
Yeah. And so I think this is really important. So ideally, if you want the most updated information, that means you make it really easy for your salesperson to work in the CRM. And if you push them out of the CRM to do a whole bunch of other things, the CRM will always be out of date. But even if that's the case, then you need to set protocols. So one thing I know is if you do a funnel review and you stop it in the middle because nothing is updated and tell them that you'll see them tomorrow morning at 7 a.m., they won't do it too many times, right? So what are the rules around it must be updated to some extent at the end of every day, at the end of every week, and before your funnel review. And if it's not, there are consequences. And I think that's where the big thing is. Nobody's checking, right? If nobody's checking, nobody's measuring, as someone said earlier, I think, Bryn, then it's not going to happen. If nobody cares if it's updated, it's not going to be updated. So those rules around, protocols around when and how things get updated is really important. Chris, what do you think?
I think it's because you're asking for those updates, letting people understand how we're leveraging that data is important, because people don't want to feel like they're doing it just as an administrivia, right? They want to understand, why am I doing this? What's it matter? That way, when you're coming into those conversations with your sellers, you're echoing back what they're telling you through past interactions plus what's in the CRM, and you're able to have an intelligent conversation around that deal. Not, oh, well, is the CRM just updated and you're checking a box? If that's the case, guess what? I could hire a precocious 8th grader to do that.
Go ahead, Brent, and then John, if you or Renee,